What's the most real paranormal story you know? Number 1. When I was a teen, my mother walked in my room, turned off my boombox and walked out. Very strange, so I go after her to see what's up and she's nowhere on the stairs. I looked for her and she's having a seizure in the kitchen. There was a decent sized pool of blood from where she hit her head too. No way she could have gotten there and bled that much, even if she sprinted. Wigged me out. So in the hospital I told her. She got really quiet for a bit, then told me she had no memory from that whole day except from the floor she could see me standing at the kitchen entryway. Then I ran past myself into the kitchen. She has no other memory until waking up in the hospital a couple of days later. Decades later, I was dozing off in her hospice room. I thought I woke up to her by my chair, hand on my shoulder, telling me to take my dad to get some pie and coffee across the street. Then, I actually woke up. It was so disorienting. I figure dad needs food and some air, so I convince him to go. When we walked back into hospice, her nurse came up and told us she had just passed. I think my mom wanted my dad out of there so she could go. Number 2. The most compelling paranormal experience I've ever had was when my older sister had visions of the future. 3 of us sisters were playing in the kitchen while my dad was away hunting. My older sister screamed suddenly, staring in shock. Younger sis and I asked what was wrong. She said she saw a massive, whitish column moving toward her. Not like an apparition, she had a vivid peripheral hallucination, the way many often do. But this one was uniquely powerful. We kept playing. 10 minutes later, she screamed again. This time, she thought our dad had entered the room, wearing an oddly greenish shirt. It was weird, and we made a point to cherish the spookiness of this evening. The next day, our dad was still away. My sisters were poking around in an old closet, and found a large white sack. It was unusually large, maybe 9 to 10 feet long, made of a tight hamper-like netting, and shaped like a sleeping bag. It was so bizarre, it spurred my younger sister to climb inside it, and chase older sis around the house. They found me in the kitchen, where younger sis lunged toward both of us, still wearing the sack. We instantly noticed it was precisely the positioning of yesterday's hallucination, a mysterious, massive, lunging white column, in the same damn place. We lost our shit. We were already superstitious by the time our dad got home. When he walked in the room wearing an oddly greenish tee, we couldn't help but chuckle to each other. It was extremely strange, and served to fuel some pretty unhealthy delusions we were experiencing at the time. But those coincidences were so intense, I will never forget. Number 3. As a high school, university student, I worked in a restaurant which was in an old Iron Master's mansion in the UK. The building itself is around 350 years old, and before it was a restaurant, it was a retirement home complete with a morgue in the always pitch-black attic. I worked there for about 4 years, part-time mostly, but full-time in the summer breaks. There would always be the feeling of never quite being alone, even if it was just me in the restaurant and a lone manager in the office. I would often hear floorboards creaking above, sounding like people walking over them, to the point I would go upstairs and investigate. In my peripheral vision, I often would catch the motion of someone turning the corner out of my sight, as if someone was walking away from me. Again, this was to the point where I would walk around the corner to ensure no customers or other staff members were there. The running joke between the staff was that the ghost was called Mary. If anyone reported anything strange, it was just brushed off as old Mary again. One night, one of the managers organized a psychic evening. The night went as planned, and at the end the psychic had a little Q&A. The organizing manager asked the psychic, "Do you get any vibes from this place?" The psychic replied there was an elderly lady rolling around and her name was not Mary but Elizabeth. I was working on the bar that night with one of my friends, and the manager hurried over to us in an excited manner and said, "The psychic said the ghost's name is not Mary but Elizabeth." When he said the name Elizabeth, all the power went out in the building. The only light was the emergency lighting. for the fire exits and one of the Red Bull fridges which were on a different circuit for some reason. We all stood there for about 10 seconds silently frozen, and then the power came back on. We awkwardly laughed, and then carried on. After that I always ensured I corrected people when they blamed anything strange on Mary, too. Number 4. My mom moved us into a new home. She was in the living room trying to hook the cable up, and I was in her room roughly 10 feet away. She kept asking me to turn the TV on to see if it connected, but every time I turned it on it was loud static. When I turned the TV off after another unsuccessful attempt, there was a large solid black human-like figure standing behind me in the reflection of the TV. I was facing the only entrance and I was 100% alone in that room. It was the middle of the day, but all our curtains were closed, so it wasn't a reflection from outside. I ran like hell, and when I told my mom she didn't believe me. My brother and I consistently had experiences over the many years we lived there. Every single night you would hear and feel someone running back and forth down the hallway. My brother and I were across the hall from each other, but we were on the opposite side of the house from my mom, behind a closed door with our only pet, a dog, Rip. So many nights we'd both look out our doors at the same time to see if it was the other person, but nothing. We learned to live with it as it never stopped. Another time in broad daylight, I watched my dog walk into a room we used as storage in the same hallway. I laughed and went down the hall to get him out, saying something like, "Silly boy, you can't go in there," but when I turned into the room it was empty. I was super weirded out because I watched my entire dog walk in. When I got back down the hallway I then saw my dog through our glass door fast asleep on the patio. There was no exit point from that room except a window that wouldn't really open, so it stayed closed and locked. I have so many other stories, but when my brother and I moved out, my mom finally agreed. The house was haunted. She woke up in her room to a dark human-like figure standing over her. When she turned the lamp on her nightstand on and it was gone. Number 5. My childhood home didn't just have my grandma, my dog and I living in it. There were 3 other beings in the house. One was an old man who had died in my house about 40 years earlier. Me and my grandma would hear him walking around sometimes in steel-toe boots, and one time he actually started playing country music from the 50s on a laptop that was closed and powered off. He only ever showed himself a couple of times, but never around me or my grandma, only to an aunt who had been staying in the basement. She one day asked if we had ever seen anything in the house, then told us she had seen an old man peek out at her from our laundry room. Apparently he didn't look like he was evil, just kind of looking around to see who was there. There was a spirit that never really showed itself or said anything, but it would move things to weird places, throw things across rooms, lock doors, and would also slam doors. One day my dog was outside, but I heard something downstairs. Completely forgetting my dog was outside, I called down the stairs as I was worried he was getting into something. As per usual, as I called down the stairs into the pitch-black basement, I heard a crystal-clear low growl and kind of just ushered the dog to come upstairs by calling his name. He never came up. I was just going to go downstairs when I heard my dog howling in the front yard. No one was home, no TV was on, nothing. Safe to say I waited outside with my dog for my grandma to get home from work that day. Another one was a little girl. No one could ever see her, but me. She only ever showed herself a couple of times though. Once when I was really young she appeared behind my door, which was wide open. She was kneeling down crying really hard. Of course I freaked out, and when my grandma came rushing in she was no longer there. Another time she showed herself when I was in sleep paralysis. This time I could only slowly move my eyes, which led to me seeing her knelt down in the corner of my room crying. She once sent a picture from my phone of her white forehead and black hair. At the time I had blonde hair and had not sent any picture of my forehead, and no one was home or had access to my social media. Sometimes me and my grandmother would hear her crying around the house, or she would throw some things sometimes. I had a feeling she was traumatized and died at a young age due to the way she had literally brought sadness into a room. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I had also endured my fair amount of trauma in the home, so sometimes I felt connected to her, but almost too connected for my personal comfort. I began feeling the sadness she brought with her, and I think I may have gotten an attachment from it. I am of Aboriginal descent, and one day my grandmother decided she wanted to smudge my room because activity had gotten super bad in there and it was always at least 7 degrees colder than the rest of the home. She immediately felt a coldness in the corner and asked if that's where the little girl had been crying, and she was right. As she was smudging, I started to cry very abruptly and hard. I was nearly sobbing. My grandma had to stop smudging then. Told me that the girl most likely had an attachment to me, and I shouldn't have cried because in our culture and beliefs that means that you are inviting them to stay with you. My grandma died a couple of years later and I moved out of the home, but I still sometimes feel like she is with me. Number 6. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decided to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hasn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen, into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen, maybe more, but it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow, the heavy breathing, the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was an EEII number 7." So when I was around 8 years old I moved into an apartment with my mom and brother. My mom and brother weren't the nicest people in the world, so I was already very sensitive to the mood of environments around me. Immediately walking into this apartment for the first time I knew something was off. I figured it was me being nervous about a new place and thought nothing of it. We lived there for 4 years, and in those 4 years I noticed a horrible rotting smell. Like a decomposing animal smell. We checked out the attic, we were on the 3rd floor, and found nothing. Had maintenance check it out and also found absolutely nothing. And the smell continued. Going away and coming back randomly. Of our bathroom doors would sometimes sound like someone banging on them randomly despite no one being in the bathroom or even near the door. I also had a Nintendo 3DS at the time, and I took a picture one night randomly messing with the camera on it, and I saw a picture of a blue phantom figure staring right back into the camera at me, and I was absolutely terrified and didn't sleep well for days after that. Another time I was watching the show 16 in my room alone, and I heard a man's laugh right next to my ear as if someone was laughing in my ear. Changed the channel and still heard it, but only louder, and I could almost feel someone's breath in my ear as they did it. And there's many other stories. However, the absolute last straw for me and my family was when we were all watching TV one night in the living room. All of our doors were shut at the time, and we heard one of the doors open, then the sound of someone running down the hallway, stopping right in the living room. After that we got a hotel and broke our lease because it was terrifying. We did some digging after and found out a man had apparently beaten his wife to death in that apartment and then relieved himself a few days later. The apartment complex failed to mention this to us, among other shady things, but that's a different story. I'm 20 now and a lot of it still scares me to think about. Number 8. Easy. The home I live in. We have paranormal activity in the home off and on. The most significant events I can remember lasted over a 2-year period where I owned a dead woman's shirt. For context, my dad's best friend lost his wife about 7 years before I was given the shirts. There were 2. One was her favorite, and the other was the shirt she was in when she lost her battle to cancer. Why did he keep that one? I wish I knew. From minute one I knew there was something wrong in the house. I walked in from school one day and didn't even have to look at the shirts to know something was in my house that shouldn't be there. The activity centered around the shirts. People got sick holding the red one, the one she passed in. Nausea, migraines, anxiety spikes. I wouldn't tell them anything about the shirt. They would grab it from my closet and start feeling sick within a few minutes. The other shirt was fine and had a calming energy to it. Well, the activity started when I started feeling watched. I couldn't sleep in my room anymore. I already had issues with sleeping in my room but had resolved them up until that point. Things would move and disappear and show up in random places a week later, like my makeup showing up in my closet or my glasses being in the laundry room. I started having weird vague dreams where I had no face. There was one dream I had where something turned all the lights off, and when I woke up the lights all turned on. I had 3 bouts of sleep paralysis while owning these shirts and never had a history of it before. I had my hair yanked several times. I started hearing something mimic my parents' footsteps and voices and coughing when I was alone in the home. I remember walking past the master bedroom and hearing my mom cough, only to find the room empty and her car gone. On multiple occasions I woke up to my name being spoken in my ear, and once what sounded like someone clapping. When my dad's friend passed away last year, I grabbed the shirt his wife died in and placed it under his arm and held his hand until he passed. The activity has since stopped. Rip Doug and Donnie, but at least you're together now in the afterlife and she's not causing problems in my house anymore. Number 9. I've had a few paranormal experiences, but 2 in particular stand out. First one was when I was a child in the 70s. My parents had friends and some of our relatives over one evening. They occasionally played with tarot cards and Ouija boards in these little parties. Nothing intense, no candles, or anything. Mom said usually whatever the Ouija board said was usually didn't make sense, like the spirit that they talked to more than once that claimed to have been a Viking and was an ancestor of my mom. We didn't have Viking ancestors, so it was never taken seriously whatsoever. Well, I guess one night whatever they talked to was something dark and it made Mom uncomfortable and they all stopped playing and it got put away in the game closet. Well, 2 days later the Ouija board caught on fire. Just the Ouija board. And that's why Ouija boards became forbidden in our household. Oh, and last year, we did indeed discover we had some Viking ancestors while doing our genealogy. Second story was in the 90s. I worked in a Toys R Us that everyone said was haunted. We couldn't hardly keep an overnight crew because of it. We were doing a bit of a remodel and I was put in charge of an overnight crew of about 12 people. In about 2 weeks all but 2 had quit. So one night it's me and one of the 2 that hadn't quit. The other one had called in sick or had the day off or something. So it was just me and her locked in overnight. All night it was super uneventful. We went to take our lunch break and were sitting there at the table in the break room eating. Suddenly a penny falls between us. Then a second one. Then a third. Now at the time I had a coworker who was something of a prankster. So I looked up expecting to see that he or someone else had wedged pennies into the ceiling tiles. No. No pennies. Then another one falls and a few more. It freaking started raining pennies. We ran out of there and listened at the door. A little while after it got quiet in there we went back in and pennies were everywhere. All over the table, the floor, the couch. She quit on the spot. I still have a jar with all those pennies. It was almost $3 worth of pennies. Number 10. When I was younger, around 4th grade, I slept with my door open. Out the door is a very short hallway you could cross from my room to my parents' room in about 4 steps. On the other side of the hallway from my door is my parents' room. On the right side wall is the bathroom and the left goes out to the dining room, living room. They were basically one large room. I awoke at 12 a.m. I saw a silhouette of my uncle leaning his back along the doorframe on the right side. To preference, he wasn't dead, he was alive at the time and still currently is. I said, "Why are you standing there? You can come in, I know who you are, we're family." It stood there for a good 2 minutes before moving. As it slowly came towards me, instead of walking it crawled along the floor like a shadow would. I freaked the fuck out as it got closer and I noticed that the shadow on the floor no longer looked like my uncle, but a small child and it had what seemed to be a kitchen knife in its hand. I screamed bloody murder for someone to come help. My mother blasted through her door, turned on my light and asked what's wrong. Because of how the light was angled exiting my room, a small corner by her bedroom door was still covered with darkness. There it was standing not moving as if unable to escape because the light blocked its path, but I could clearly see it bright as day. I pointed crying in absolute terror saying, "It's right there, can't you see it?" She said, "There's nothing there." She calmed me down and closed the door. Ever since I've slept with my door closed. Cut to middle school, where we moved to a new house, the one I am currently in. I decided for some stupid reason. It's been years now. I am older now. It's a new house. I am sharing a room with my new baby brother. It wouldn't happen again. I slept with the door open that night, just for it to happen exactly the same way. I don't know why I didn't remember last time. I invited it inside my room again. Same uncle silhouette. Same transformation into a child with a knife. Stuck in a dark corner in the hallway. When my mother came, she still couldn't see it. Ever since then I've decided I'll never sleep with the door open for the rest of my life nor unlocked, because of other reasons, similar but not at all as terrifying. That's stuck with me ever since and makes me personally believe in the paranormal. Don't care if no one believes me, that's fine. I don't need anyone to believe me. I know what I saw and what I experienced, and it's definitely traumatized me. Number 11. When I used to work late second shift, I would get home around 1 in the morning. There were always weird things happening in my apartment, but this was the weirdest that happened. But first I'll share some of the weird things. On multiple occasions my wife and I would hear loud banging noises as if there were someone upstairs drunkenly walking around. We always assumed it was our neighbor who was a heavy alcoholic, but he wouldn't be home most of the times we heard it. We also had one of those stackable washer-dryer combos, and anyone who's ever had one knows how high up the washer lid needs to be to latch open. Well, dozens of times we would start the washer only to have it stop halfway through the cycle with the lid open and latched to the bottom of the dryer part. I thought maybe because it rocked back and forth it was an old shitty washer. Same with the whole place, a real slum run by a slumlord, that it just popped open. No possible way for that to happen unless the damn thing nearly fell face flat and then popped itself back upright. We also had a hanging light in the upstairs area by the kitchen. This light is part of my main story, that would randomly sway back and forth as if someone gently tapped on it. There were always big trucks driving by and going down the back alley parking lot we had, so I assumed the vibrations from them going by could cause it to sway. Well, it started to sway more and more, as if someone walked by and gave it a good rap to get it to swing. Nothing that the vibrations from big trucks could do, otherwise our cabinet doors and items on the wall would have been knocked over. This kept up for a few months, with it getting slightly stronger of sways and the weeks went on. My wife even captured it swinging on her phone one night after she got out of the shower and messaged me at work asking if I was home because it was swaying as if someone ran into it. So, I just got home from work. I believe it was around 1:30 a.m. I got home this time. I get inside, I change out of my work clothes, head back upstairs where the TV, Xbox, and hanging light are. I get myself a snack and start playing some video games to unwind from work. I forget exactly which game it was, either Smite or COD. I had the hanging light on. It had a sliding dimmer switch that controlled the brightness when on. I had it at the lowest light setting, a nice relaxing dim light. I was in the middle of my match and something compelled me to look to my right where the kitchen, light switch, and hanging light were. I sat there, and as I was looking in that direction I watched as the sliding light slid all the way to high setting and the hanging light illuminated all the way up. I finished my match and went to investigate, maybe thinking the spring inside was busted or that something was amiss with the switch. It was fine, just as it had always been. It took more than just a teeny bit of force to move the slider. It was maybe 6 months later we bought our own house and moved out of there. Number 12 just told this story the other day. My girlfriend bought a house a couple years ago in an old part of town. We owned a separate house when we first started dating at the time. Roughly this house was built in the 1930s. I helped her move in and start decorating, and maybe a few months go by until we realized the home inspector missed that the skylight in the attic was leaking. To make a long story short, we ended up hiring a local contractor to remove the skylight and patch it up with new roofing shingles. All in all, we were happy. But immediately afterward the house was super uneasy. Words can't express the tension that was in the air. We had a technician from the water company come out and change out the meter in the basement, and he told us, "Do you get a weird feeling down there?" Because it felt like someone was watching me in the corner of the basement. I brushed it off, really thinking it was nothing. Then my girlfriend was doing some painting down in the basement and she claims that a shadow figure zoomed past her in the basement. Then it started picking up. One night we get into a fight and I ended up sleeping at my house, and I swear to God, I had an extremely scary night terror about something stalking me and breaking into my house. I abruptly woke up panicking, and maybe 30 seconds later something pounded on my door. I looked outside and nothing was there. I immediately called my girlfriend at like 1 a.m. and I said, "You're not going to believe, but I had a night terror and I woke up and 30 seconds later something tried kicking in my door." She said that ever since I left there have been footsteps in the attic pacing back and forth. Then I slept over a week later and we both heard footsteps in the attic. Whatever is going on, it followed me and we had simultaneous hauntings. We came to the conclusion that whatever was there, we disturbed it. This is going to sound ridiculous, but I literally went to her house and spoke out loud in every room including the basement and attic and said that, "We mean no harm or disrespect, we are just trying to keep the house in good shape. You're not allowed to follow us or hurt us anymore. It will not happen again." Then my girlfriend did the same thing and used a protection candle in it. After that everything was fine, like nothing ever happened. The tension in the entire house just evaporated. I ended up finding out that a few of the long-term residents died in the house, so maybe some energy stayed in their IDK. Definitely one of the scariest moments of my life. She ended up selling the house maybe 8 months later. Number 13. So I'm 17F. This was the fairly recent one and there have been many experiences before this, but this has now probably topped my list of these experiences. I had some friends over for a hangout around the fire in the backyard. Only one of my friends out of the 4 knew of my experiences, as we have been recording them since year 9. I was sitting next to Dylan with our backs to the theater room's window, when I felt the urge to look behind me as if something was there. The weirdest thing was that we were talking about Dylan's Ouija board experiences with a spirit that had drowned. I didn't let anyone say its name during this experience, I don't know why. I looked twice and then I could see it. A girl, hands flat against the glass, her hair black almost slicked back, its eyes were odd, I can't describe them. My friend M knew about me feeling something behind me, as I had whispered it to her as the boys were talking. Maybe 15 minutes later, Dylan had gone quiet after looking at the window. I asked him what was wrong. He simply stated that he felt something in the room at the window. Up until now, I had been told that they were all hallucinations. Maybe he was making it up to have some fun. Even with that in mind, I froze. "Can you see it?" He could not. "Good." I described to them what it looked like, but I left out the most horrific detail, its horrible smile. I can still see it. Around midnight, Matt and Hayden were going on about how badly they wanted to see it. I mean, I understand where they're coming from, who wouldn't? I then came to learn that Dylan could also see it now, and I now have the clarity that it was all real. Because he explained in detail what its smile looked like, the same one I refused to talk about, because it was so horribly wrong. Stretching up close to its ears, like truth or dare, but it was empty. Our looks of horror were proof enough that this was no joke. I learned that Dylan's family is very eccentric, which I had no idea about until that night. This wasn't even the worst part. About 10 minutes after that, we tried to steer the conversation elsewhere and I froze. I have never felt like this before, in my life. Tears pricked my eyes but never spilled as I stared blankly into the space where no one sat. I can't even begin to explain the fear I felt in that moment, but it was awful. My friend later said I had become almost lifeless, as if I was trying to curl in on myself, but I don't remember that. I remember asking Dylan if it was in the window, swearing in a panic as he struggled to understand me as fear coursed through me. It was dead silent now. They were concerned, especially when Dylan started to stress since it was no longer in that room, asking me if it was behind M, who was next to me. I'm surprised I didn't cry, as all I could do was mumble yes, even though it was behind me rather than M. Then, it walked through me. I felt my energy drain out of me, but it was almost relieving as all those emotions suddenly left and I felt fine. Aside from the shock, I was snapped back into reality, wiping my eyes repeatedly as I tried to get rid of the tears that still never fell. We experienced 3 smaller instances that night, but they could never compare to that thing. At least now I have another person to be my proof of what happened, and that it was real. I still have not told my parents, and I don't think I ever will. My dad used to be an apprentice psychic. I don't know what lead him to stop, but I need people I can relate to, because it can be so terrifying. With several more instances prior in this very house, I have to say I'm glad we're moving. My parents are not, but those are for another time. There have been instances in several other houses as well, but this is the worst. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.